Years ago, one of my mentors made the distinction between simply preaching and actually ministering to people. He told me people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. When I became a full time youth and family minister, I realized how inadequately prepared I was for dealing with the complex challenges facing youth, parents, and families. I honestly cared, but I was not competent. Today's ministers can become better equipped to meet this challenge through the Master of Arts in Family Life Ministry offered by Faulkner University. This program integrates prevention oriented strategies as well as intervention strategies within a church setting, focusing on counseling skills. All these courses may be completed online from the convenience of your home or workplace and at a time that is convenient to the schedule of the student. There is a 50% discount for the members of the Church of Christ. Now, although this program is not designed to fulfill any requirements toward becoming a licensed counselor, it is designed to thoroughly equip the minister by providing courses including but not limited to the skills required for counseling couples, families in crisis, as well as dealing with family dynamics, human intimacy, sexuality, parent and character education, as well as church assessments. If you're interested in more information, contact faulkner.edu/KGST. That is faulkner.edu/KGST. KGST stands for Curley Graduate School of Theology. You can also contact graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu with any questions or to explore the eligibility requirements for the tuition discount. Graduate enrollment at faulkner.edu. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Front-loading and framing. These are terms used to set up an initiative game or a low element on a challenge course. When you come to a challenge course, you do a series of warm-ups. Oftentimes they're called initiative games, and they're things that you do to interact with people, and they don't require any props. Well, then you move into what they call the low elements or the low part of the course, and you have these interesting obstacles and these problems to solve, and they have these really creative names. In my history as a ropes course facilitator, I have worked on the Wild Woozy. I've done the Truss Boil, the Trough Ball, the Gator Crawl, the Tea Party, the Mohawk Crossing, the Nitro Crossing, the Helium Ring, the Nuclear Reactor, or as the legendary Mike King called it, the Nuclear Reactor. Most of these names and most of these games I inherited because as I was being trained to be a facilitator, you just kind of took the lore as it was passed on to you and you kept it. I made some contributions to the ropes course world. One such contribution is I combined several elements. I took an element called Islands, an element called All Aboard, an element called Tea Party, and an element called the TP Shuffle, and I made them into one large group activity that I called the Shipwreck. I was trained at Berry College for the most part. Berry College in Rome, Georgia had a semester-long outdoor leadership or outdoor education class. They called it Project Adventure. And as you participated in this class as a student, each student at the end of their semester had to make a contribution to the existing course by either adding a game or an actual physical element. They added on to their ropes course every year because of the students. Two of my favorite activities that I use as a facilitator. I use them on both courses that I have owned, and I even use them in my travel course. Two of those elements kind of lost some pizzazz in the naming department. Apparently, when it came time to turn in this particular activity, whoever invented it kind of got caught off guard. It probably went like this. Well, Mr. Johnson, what have you got today? Well, sir, my element involves stringing these small ropes between two trees, and it looks like a giant spider web. And we asked the participants to pass through the spider's web without touching any of the strings, or they get penalized. Strange and wonderful things will happen to them. Sounds interesting. What do you call it? The the spider web. The other one, similar, is we built this large platform, and we take this large platform. It's made out of a series of boards, and it becomes this, maybe a 10 by 5 platform. And we get our group to stand on it, and they stand on it until it's perfectly balanced. Now, if they aren't careful, it rocks back and forth, it teeters and it totters. And then once they get it balanced, they have to sing the verse of a song 3 times in a row before it touches the ground on the other end. Well, that sounds excellent. And what do you call this apparatus? We call it the the giant teeter totter. So the spider web and the teeter totter is the best you could do. You couldn't come up with Jungle Jim's terror or the nifty shifty. You just named it what it obviously was. And as much as I'd like to spend part of the time mocking the creativity of the marketing department when it came to naming these two elements, it turns out that teeter totters and seesaws have various names. If you start traveling in New England and you travel south, you'll end up that in the north, they're called tilting boards. And then as you get down into the Carolinas, they're called a ridey horse or the hickey horse. They end up being regional names for the same thing. Now, when I started talking about seesaws and teeter totters, I didn't know that there were people who actually differentiate between teeter versus totter. And in fact, in doing a little research, I found out that there's a big difference between zig and zag. Zig and zag are actually different directions. A zig is a 1/4 rotation to the right, and a zag is a 1/4 rotation to the left, and 2 zigs do not make a zag. In fact, as I was looking up the ideas about teeter totters and seesaws, I came to find out that a lot has been written about the technical definition. There's a differentiation between a teeter totter and a seesaw. In fact, a teeter totter and a seesaw are supposedly they have different lengths and different shapes of the board, and there was some whimsical nonsense about singular versus multiple pivot points. To most people, teeter totters are also called seesaws. And then when you understand what seesaw means, we call them seesaw, SEE space SAW. It turns out that term seesaw is an anglicization of a French word, seesaw, CI-CA, which means this, that. One linguist, Peter Trudgill, says that the term teeter-totter is actually Nordic in origin, and it comes from the word called teeter-matorter, Tittermatorter. In any case, the use of teeter-totter or seesaw or zigzag demonstrate a linguistic process called a reduplication. And a reduplication is basically where you have a word or a syllable and it's doubled, but you put a different vowel in it, and then it can be used with indiscriminate interchangeability. Now, there are a group of people who insist on the technical difference. These are the purists, and they want to insist on the technical difference between a seesaw and a teeter-totter. And I believe those people who know this and insist on this differentiation, I've got some advice for them. I would simply say go out and find a teeter-totter or a seesaw and simply play on one. Because if your thinking is that rigid and you're insistent on the use of those words as a matter of taste, breeding, culture, or accuracy, then odds are in your world you actually call them sit-sats, because you would sit on it, or you would find a seat on it, and you sat on it, and you sit there all day waiting on somebody to play with because a person like you doesn't have any friends. Be that as it may, we used our element, and we actually called it the giant teeter-totter. And we used it on our ropes course, and we taught lessons about balance and stability. Now, in our particular iteration of the game, our goal was to get your group on it and minimize, if not eliminate, the effect of the teeters and the totters. I built the teeter totter one time, and the fulcrum or the balance point on it was not constructed on a singular point, but I had built it on half of a utility pole. I'd taken a telephone pole or utility pole and cut it in about a 5-foot length, and then I shaved it in half so it made a perfect half moon. And I attached this to the bottom of my platform, and it was virtually impossible to balance. There's a few groups who mastered that version, but very, very, very few. And it got to be so frustrating with our groups that they couldn't balance it that we retired it and turned back to the more traditional version where the whole mechanism sits on a 4x4 as the fulcrum, but the 4x4 is arranged so it points like a diamond, and the teeter totter sits on top of the point of the diamond. When we played this game, and we played this game with groups from NASA, and we played it with religious groups and marriage groups, we played it with corporate groups, we played it with engineers, we played it with athletes, we played it with management teams. Here's what I saw while watching the seesaw. If you put a group on the seesaw, the groups that are more connected achieve balance easier, and they maintain balance longer. The simple fact of a group holding each other's hands or simply touching each other on the shoulder dramatically increase the balance of the group. It basically helps them create a thing called interdependence. And interdependence is different from dependence, and it's different from independence. When I asked a group of students one time, hey, how would you describe interdependence? This bright young lady said, I would say that interdependent means we depend with each other, not just on each other. Groups that could not balance as successfully seem to be always reactionary. When the board would tilt in one direction, everybody in the group would make a dramatic move in the opposite direction. When the board would teeter, they would make it totter, and when it tottered, they would make it teeter. Reactionary groups never seem to be able to achieve balance. Or if the whole group wasn't reactionary, but they had one person, if they just had one person who was in a position of influence and they let their emotions or their instability control them, if they were on the extreme right or the extreme left of the center part of the teeter-totter and they were overreacting, just one person overreacting inside a group would make it almost impossible for the group to achieve balance. The other thing we found out when watching and observing the teeter-totter, the things we saw when watching the seesaw, is that when you get out of control, when your system is out of balance, you don't speed up, you slow down. When you decide that this system is out of balance and we're in trouble and we're out of control, you must make careful, intentional changes, not radical emotional changes. It takes slowing down and oftentimes people moving one at a time to adjust their positions to achieve balance. Another thing that we observed through the years of playing this game was that if you take away the vision of a group, most of the time, they are doomed to failure. You take away your eyes, and it really, really affects your balance. And if you take away somebody's vision on the giant teeter-totter, you've doomed them to failure. If half the group, and a lot of times we would take a group and we'd say, okay, everybody get a partner. One partner be blue, one partner be red. Or all the reds get on the teeter-totter, all the blues stay on the ground, all the reds wear a blindfold or close your eyes. If the half of the group on the teeter-totter had no vision, but they would connect to the group that had vision, it was a very simple matter to balance it. But if you had a group on the teeter-totter with no vision and you had a group on the ground with vision, but they refused to connect with them, if they stood outside the system and said, this is what you need to do, this is where you need to step, and they were directing them without facilitating them, those groups never got balanced either. Leadership with vision that is absent of connection equals failure. Once in a while, we'd get a hold of a group and they just couldn't balance the thing. For whatever reason, they might be reactionary. They might have one person who was too reactionary. They might have somebody who just didn't understand the task. And what we discovered is that to truly achieve balance in a system, everybody had to have a job, and everybody's job couldn't be the same. We would get the group off the teeter totter, and we'd say, okay, get in groups of threes, and in your cluster of three, somebody choose the name Mo, somebody choose the name Larry, somebody choose the name Curly. And then, hey, everybody get back on the teeter totter now. All the Mo's just sit down. All the Larrys freeze like a statue, and all the Curlies are free to move around. And you'd find a group that had touched the ground 8 or 9 times and could not achieve balance. They might touch the ground twice, and then all of a sudden they would be balanced, and they were able to sing their song, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. They could sing that 3 times, and that thing would stay perfectly balanced. In one evil iteration, I built the teeter totter that was one half a board off center. If this thing was made out of 15 boards, instead of the fulcrum being made to fit directly in the center of the center board, I built it where it was almost a board, maybe a half a board off center. Now, when we played with this version of the teeter totter, we said, okay, this is your group. You're supposed to get on this giant teeter totter, and you got to spread your group out. You've got to arrange your assets and the weight of all the people, and you've got to balance this. You have both ends must be off the ground. One end can't touch the ground, and then we turn them loose to play. Now, if you understand the subtle thing that building it just a little bit off center meant that when this thing was balanced, when both ends were off the ground, it was slightly canted. One end was a little higher than the other. Now, both ends are off the ground, but it wasn't perfectly level. Well, it couldn't be made perfectly level because the assumption was that it was perfectly proportionate, but it wasn't. And so many groups would have the thing balanced, and instead of singing their song, somebody would say, hey, we got to make this fine adjustment. We've got to make this little bitty adjustment. And when they spent their time making these micro adjustments and trying to fine tune the thing, they would end up touching the ground. And the point we often made with this is that sometimes our picture, our imagination, or our perception of what success is supposed to look like is not what success really looks like. And having a true goal, having a true definition, having a true understanding of this is what success really looks like, and not these preconceived ideas that we get from Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or social media or even from the media itself. Understanding that sometimes what we think success is supposed to look like is really not what it looks like. Occasionally we'd get a group on the teeter totter and we'd have to talk to them about product versus process. Now, I can tell you the groups that always were guilty of this, but I don't want to disparage any one group of people, and I don't want to be stereotypical. But you would explain to these people, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. You got to get on the teeter totter. Both ends can't touch the ground, and you got to sing the song, row, row, row your boat 3 times without the end touching. Well, they get on the teeter totter and get the thing moving, and they would rapidly sing the song like they were speaking in tongues, and then they would celebrate triumphantly as if they'd accomplished something. And technically, they did what I asked them to do. They sang the song 3 times, and neither end of the teeter-totter touched the ground, but they never actually achieved or maintained true balance. And the point of the exercise was not necessarily in the product, but the process. And if you cheat the process, the product is usually invalid anyway. And so when you start thinking about balance in your life or stability in your life, are you focusing on the product, just the end result, or are you concentrating on the process? And finally, the thing that I saw on the seesaw is we would just simply get groups off after they'd done their task and after they'd played the game, and we'd just simply ask, hey, what did it feel like to be balanced? Hey, when this thing actually got balanced, how did it feel? And we would hear words like smooth, stable, safe, calm, intentional movements, not reactionary. We were proud. We were connected. We weren't panicked. We felt satisfied. And then you ask the opposite question. Well, when you were on this thing and you hadn't figured it out, how did it feel to be out of balance? And out of balance was the opposite. It was erratic, it was scared, it was reactionary. You didn't make intentional movements, and oftentimes you were afraid to move, and people blamed each other. There was lack of communication, and there was little tolerance for mistakes or failure. If the groups who couldn't balance it were connected, they were enmeshed, and everybody did the same thing the same way, and they all reacted the same way. But more often than not, the groups who couldn't balance it were not connected at all, and there was lots of individualism, lots of selfish action, lots of people who said, I'm going to do this my way. Well, why did you move? Well, my legs were tired. I was tired of this position. My legs hurt. I was getting a cramp. I just didn't want to do this anymore. And oftentimes the feeling of out of control had a lot to do with one or more individuals who were disrupting the system. Now, I'd like you to experience this just as an object lesson. But I'd be shocked if you had a giant teeter totter in your home, your yard, your office, or your church. But if you want to test the system that you're in, if you want to test the relationships, your work environment, your social circle, your political group, your political affiliation, or your worldview, or even your religious experience, you could simulate this. Now, I'm asking you to do this as a thought exercise. We're not asking you to try this at home. But if you wanted to try it at home and you wanted to send in a waiver, you could. But basically, just find an old skateboard and take the wheels and the trucks off of it. And take that old skateboard and put it across a PVC pipe. Now, the PVC pipe probably needs to be about 2 inches round and about a foot long. And then you also need to find a brick. Now, place the PVC pipe on the ground, and the slicker the ground, the harder it will be. Hardwood floors, concrete, ill-advised, but you could do it in a yard or on a wrestling mat or something like that. But you take the wheelless skateboard and you lay it perpendicular across the PVC pipe, and you simply try to stand on it and don't let either end touch the ground. Now, if you're a slackliner or a really talented surfer or a dancer or a ballerina, you might be able to do this pretty easily, but most of us will struggle. And actually, it's quite dangerous because failure happens fast. Because you get on this PVC pipe, and not only you're having to worry about up and down on both sides and where you put your weight, but you've got to make sure that rolly PVC pipe under you doesn't shoot out and send you into the wall or send you to the ground. It's very difficult to do, and in a lot of cases, it's actually dangerous. But then imagine you take that same skateboard and you set it on a block or a 2x4 or a brick. And the difference is obvious, the foundation that you built this system on. Now, it still takes a little bit of work to balance it, but you have a lot of control, and you don't really have the possibility of this catastrophic system failure. Now, you can modify the skateboard pipe version by simply adding 2 blocks to the bottom of the skateboard. Just screw them onto the bottom, and then it limits how far to the right or how far to the left you can roll, and it also limits that you can't turn like the dial of a compass on the PVC pipe. And just by simply adding some limits and adding some boundaries helps tremendously on the unstable, out of control, out of balance scenario using a skateboard and a PVC pipe. Now, if you can imagine this, or if you've actually, ignored my warning and tried this at home, just simply compare those two experiences and feelings. Do you have balance and do you have stability in your life? If you try to stand on that board with the pipe under you, the feeling of instability, lack of control, fear, impending failure, and fatigue and frustration will show up very, very fast. The fear of being hurt or the potential of actually being hurt is real. And in any relationship or situation you find yourself experiencing the out of balance, instability of this exercise, you know you're in an unhealthy, if not toxic place. When you feel those rushed feelings and you're out of balance and you're unstable physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or financially, if you're relation, if your boyfriend or girlfriend creates this feeling in you, that's not infatuation. That's an unhealthy or toxic relationship. You're involved with somebody who's got a personality disorder. If your job creates this feeling, it's toxic. And I don't care what they're paying you, they can't pay you enough to replace you what it's actually costing you emotionally and psychologically and spiritually and in your health. If the way you spend money or the way you choose to self-medicate, whether it's drink, smoke, or eat, causes you to live in the extremes, and then that's an unstable system and you're out of balance. If the church you attend makes you feel this way, and a lot of the really radical religious views creates a lot of neuroticism. If you attend a place of worship and it makes you feel unstable and reactionary, then you're not attending a church, you're attending a cult. And you're about one full moon away from sacrificing a sack full of cats. Get out of there. Now the other scenario, placing that skateboard across a brick or a block, that scenario is how healthy, balanced relationships should feel. And if they don't feel entirely comfortable, at least the effort required to get comfortable is far outweighed by the feeling that you achieve, where you have this stability and this restedness mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and spiritually. The concept comes from Psalms 46:10, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And what the psalmist is writing there, that being still is not freezing. It's not standing in a position like a statue, but it really carries the connotation of being stable and being set and being settled in the confidence that comes from belonging to God. In the first scenario, the skateboard on the PVC pipe with no bumpers, you can radically change the balance and improve the stability by simply adding those bumpers. You add those bumpers to the bottom of the board, and you simply have limits to how far that board can travel or rotate. See, you don't need to stay in a system. You don't need to participate in a system. You don't need to be connected to a system that constantly exceeds your limits or their limits. The second way to add some stability is basically to connect to some stability. And literally, you can try to stand on this board that's on a PVC pipe and you can touch. And I don't mean grab, I don't mean hold, I don't mean grip, I don't mean grasp. I mean simply touch something. You could put two fingers on a rope hanging from a rafter. You could take a mop handle and put it on the ground and hold it. You could touch the shoulder of somebody standing beside you. You could put your hand on the wall, and any connection you have to something that is stable will lend stability to an unstable system. And once you connect to some stability, you may be drawn away from the unstable toward the stable, or it may just help you maintain a situation if it's not changeable. Now, if it becomes changeable, if you say, I'm on this PVC pipe on this skateboard, and I think I'd rather be on a skateboard that's on a block or a brick. You see, once you analyze your system and realize it's out of control and out of balance, the other thing is simply to replace the round pipe for the block. And it's amazing how different it is to balance on a brick or a board or a block or a 2x4. You still have to balance, but it's doable. And once you get it, it may take a little bit of effort to maintain it, but it doesn't take all your effort. And then you get to enjoy the benefits of being in that system without constantly having to repair and adjust the system. Simply replacing the foundation upon which your system rests is the difference in the attainable, prolonged stability or the pervasive, toxic, unachievable, unsustainable instability. The two different feelings, in unstable, out of balance versus balanced and stable, are so dramatic that it ought to be obvious when we find ourselves in these kinds of systems where our balance has been corrupted. And they've either been corrupted by someone, by ourselves, or by our circumstance. And it ought to be obvious, but oftentimes it's not. And it's not obvious until you try to describe it to someone else. Hey, this is the relationship I have at work with my boss, with my friend, with my spouse, with my church, with my politics. And when you begin to describe it, what seemed balanced to you with a trusted sounding board may be identified as unbalanced. It may not be obvious that you're out of balance until you experience the opposite and you simply compare the two. Try standing on the PVC pipe versus standing on a brick or a board or a block. And then it may not be obvious that you're out of balance until you introduce someone or something that adds stability to a flailing, yes, flailing, not failing, but a flailing system to which you realize that you don't have any stability. And then when you realize I don't have any stability in this situation, I may need to make this change. I may need to add these resources. I may need to add these kind of people. I may need to add a needed connection to get this stability. And oftentimes we're out of balance and we don't recognize it until we tell someone, until we experience it, or until we find the resource that we needed. In all of these scenarios, teeter-totters, skateboards, people, churches, and politics, probably systemic balance is rarely 100% static. Every situation you're in requires some fluidity, some subtle shifts, and some simple adjustments. Now, in some cases, it requires a radical shift. But if you're in a system that requires a radical shift, then make sure to make those big changes by taking time, by planning, and by doing well thought out execution. Now, if where you are and how you feel, if the system you're presently in currently feels like you're standing on a skateboard on top of a PVC pipe, and all your energy of every single day and every single moment and every single thought is spent in trying just to get balanced. If you're in that situation and you don't recognize it, then chances are you're teetering on the brink of disaster. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to 3Ws and a dot, worldchristian.org, find the Donate Here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure, is sponsored by us. What? We sponsor ourselves? Is that even legal? Check us out on Amazon. You can have access to the titles of Pedagogue, the Youth Ministry book by Lonnie Jones, Cognitive Spiritual Development, a Christ-centered approach to spiritual self-esteem, Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space, a small essay using the principles of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to talk about psychological and emotional self-defense, If I Were a Mouse, a children's book written and illustrated by Lonnie Jones, and then The Selfish Reel, a very short story about a decision. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel to see archived lessons and presentations from across the country, some videos with rope tricks and knots. Don't forget to visit the Facebook page 550 Guys to learn about the little rope men that we make and that we invented and that we make. And then be sure to click like, subscribe, and share. This is Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure.